Good morning, and thanks everyone for coming. Just so that you know, this is being recorded for some folks. It's spring break, and there are some team members who had already made plans to be with kids and do some vacation things. But just so that you know, it is being recorded. Not us visually, but our voices and the PowerPoint. So if you need to monitor yourself or whatever. So we're getting back together as Goal 2, and we met at the end of February, 27th, 28th, 29th, something like that, over in one of the rooms here, and began, it was a large group, and we have a large group related to Goal 2. So we are at the point where we are trying to move forward, talk about strategies, and begin some work on tactics. So we have a couple of goals today for our meeting. We want to recap our progress so far. That was a large meeting that had a lot of work that was done at the end of February, so we want to bring people back around to that work and the outcome, some of the review that has gone on. Introduce some draft strategies from the work that was done at the end of February. You remember there were lots of stickums, different color stickies, things on the board or the walls. We want to spend a little bit of time refining the strategies, not wordsmithing, but refining them and making sure this is the way that we want to go or the direction we want to go. And then identify some breakout teams among you here to do start some work related to identifying tactics under the strategy. So that's our goal for today. We're here from 8:30 to 10, and I think we should have sufficient time to get through what we plan. So our team today is me, Holly, and Terry. And we probably should do, just to make sure, I know many of us know each other, but some of us might have not been here on the 28th, or if you met someone just for the first time at that meeting, you might not remember. So it's good to just go around and say which office you're with. So Sarah Drinkwater, Student Services.
Holly Carter, I'm on the delivery team supporting strategic planning, and I'm also a policy analyst embedded in the assessment team.
Good morning, Victor Cato. I'm also on the delivery team, so tongue twisted this morning. I work in the Deputy Superintendent's Office with Strategic Initiatives.
I'm Terry Ward. I am also a policy analyst, Deputy Superintendent's Office. Got here less than a year ago. Hi, Nancy Johnson-Dorn, and I'm in Student Services. Lisa Darnold, Student Services. Mike Boyd, Communications with the Deputy Superintendent's Office. And just to clarify, I'm here as kind of a point person for communications, so just more to listen and learn. Christy Dudley, Office of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment, Standards and Instruction Support. Brennan Van Norman, Student Services.
Tim Boyd, Teaching, Learning, and Assessment.
Jonathan, Teaching.
Brad Van Hart, Student Services.
So there, as I mentioned, there are probably a handful of people who weren't able to make it with their vacation plans, et cetera. That's why we're recording it, because they wanted to find out if there were ways to participate, and we just thought this might be easy given the number of folks who weren't able to make it. So that's our introduction, and what Holly's going to go through next is kind of reviewing the past and the present, looking at our work that we did at the end of February, and then we'll move towards the strategies. So thank you, Holly.
So going back, I don't even know quite how far, because I was out on leave when this first step was taken. I believe it was Kate that facilitated, for those of you who were part of that first meeting sometime in the fall and early winter, that was really looking at doing a visioning activity. And just to recap the purpose of that, it's really to filter ODE's vision, which is on the left side of the screen. Every student will have access to and benefit from a world-class, well-rounded, and equitable education system. To filter that vision through the lens of Goal 2, which is to support transition successfully with every student supported and on track to meet expected grade level outcomes through a well-rounded education. So that activity, which again happened a few months ago, was really designed to help flesh out what is it that we're really trying to accomplish, kind of the why. Why do we have a strategic plan? why do we have Goal 2 as one of the areas of focus in our strategic plan. And it really served as a priming activity more than anything else, just to kind of, again, get that context, get that focus.
So when we first started the visioning, it was, think of it more at the management level of folks who got together. I know Markeisha was there, I was there. Who was visioning with Kate and the big hot air balloon? You were Goal 1. No, you were on Goal 1. Okay.
So about half the group. So from there, these are just a couple of snippets that I'm just going to go through. You can kind of read them as I go through. These were some of the quotes that came out of that visioning activity in terms of, again, what that vision looks like through the lens of students transitioning successfully. Okay. So from there, we also used, and Victor and Kate introduced, a theory of action that is helping to guide and shape our work. So, the vision, again, we have our...
Just real fast to clarify, the quotes that were pulled out, that was really about envisioning when our vision was realized.
Correct.
So not as we were trying to add to the vision or adjust it. I think that might be helpful because the vision was established and then we were kind of walking through what does this look like when we realize that vision and not how are we going to enhance or adjust the vision.
Yeah.
So,
thank you for providing that
I had to remember for myself. Those don't seem like this.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it was a filter as opposed to an enhancement. So yeah, thank you for calling that clarification out. So again, that visioning activity under the theory of action, which is really how we organize the story of the how and the why. That visioning activity really fed into the step 2 in this progression around really looking at in the next 5 to 10 years. If we realize our vision, wildest dreams come true, what does that look like, and what are some of the changes that are inherent from where we are now to what we want to see when that vision is realized. Step 3 around what changes do you expect need to happen now in order to reach our long-term outcomes. That's really where our strategies are going to get defined, is defining what are those specific changes that we need to be making now in order to make progress towards that vision. So when we talk about outcomes in education, we tend to think about student outcomes primarily, right? But for purposes of our strategic planning, we really need to make sure that when we're thinking of outcomes in that context, that we're really focused on what is within our sphere of influence or our locus of control. And really, essentially, for us at the Department of Education, that is at the systems level as opposed to the student level. So it requires a little bit of a mind shift and something of a paradigm shift from the way we're used to working with districts and then thinking of student outcomes, to rolling that back to thinking of how do we interact and support districts so that they are poised to be able to provide that support to students to have them realize the student outcomes. So as we consider the potential strategies that we might put into Goal 2 to support districts in ensuring that students transition successfully, we really want to make sure that the strategy areas represent those levers that are, again, within our sphere of influence, where we can really have the most, the strongest impact on reaching ultimately that student outcome through the realm of the systems of the schools and the districts that we work with. And to help us think around that and to make sure also that we're at the right grain size for our strategies, okay, real quick. To make sure that we're at the right grain size for our strategies, there are 4 strategy areas that were identified through that theory of action activity for those of you who have participated in that, again, back this fall and early winter. Those strategy areas, and we'll kind of see how some of our thinking so far is mapped across this in just a moment, but the 4 categories or areas are conditions, capacities, laws and policies, and relationships. And within these 4 strategy areas, the question that we're asking ourselves is what changes do we need to see in order to best support districts in ensuring that all students transition successfully. And really quickly, I skipped over a slide, I'll go back very quickly. At our last meeting, just again for that context, the question was asked, when we're talking about transitions, what are we talking about? And so we did confirm that transitions, we're really looking at these moments in a child's progression through the education system from early learning to kindergarten, 3rd to 4th grade, that transition from elementary to middle school, 8th grade to high school, and then finally high school to college and career, with that last one overlapping with our goal 3 around students graduating college and career ready. So before we kind of get into the strategy concepts that we brainstormed at our last meeting, does anyone have any questions, or for those of you who participated in the visioning activity, any context you want to provide for the larger group?
For those who were there in February, I tend to be a visual person. The transition, when we identified the transitions, they were up on one of the walls in B, and we kind of put it out on a continuum. On the other intersecting wall over here was a grid with the 4 strategy areas: conditions, capacities, laws, and sort of systems and the relationships. And so for me, I'm going back and remembering, and we were putting up stickies in the different squares about whether we thought it was a capacity or a condition, etc. So for those who are visual like me, that's what I see when Holly is going back and reviewing this.
For the strategy area, so again, those are defining what changes need to happen now for us to achieve our goals. And again, these are the 4 strategy areas we talked about: conditions, relationships, capacities, laws, policies, and institutions. So as mentioned, also, those 4 strategy areas are, again, really defined at what's within our sphere of influence. So again, really wanting to make sure that we've got that systems focus. And Victor, when he was presenting out, facilitating the Goal 3 team yesterday, he had a really good insight around the visual here of the bifocal lenses, which is that we still want to have the ability to look down and be able to see that student level and the impact that the work that we're doing is having on students. But we also need to be able to have that, that broader, longer vision picture, that bigger picture, I should say, in terms of how we're working at the systems level in order to impact that student change. Did I get that right, Victor?
Very good. For those of us who are actually fortunate enough to wear bifocal lenses, that's exactly what that graphic is to display. It emphasizes how we're supposed to have that system focus, but at the same time be able to zero in on the student. So although we're looking at the whole system, we should be able to look at within those strategies, tactics, whatever we're doing, to see where does that student live within that system.
All right. So at our last meeting, back at the end of February, we did an additional brainstorming activity that was plotting out some potential strategy concepts, and I'll use that term to really refer to raw ideas, that they're not fully baked strategies yet, but they're concepts that could and have fed into the draft strategies we'll show you later on this morning. We mapped those out, identifying them as whether they were inward-facing, supporting work that needs to happen within ODE and how we operate, versus outward-facing, specific programs and bodies of support that we are offering directly to schools, districts, external partners to help them in ensuring students transition successfully. We mapped that on a 2x2 matrix that was mapping these strategy concepts based on their difficulty as well as their degree of impact, wanting to focus what we end up bringing into our draft strategies on those that are going to be the highest impact, so the strongest levers in helping us to support students in transitioning successfully. So just kind of going through, I then after that meeting, I went back and applied it across the grid of the 4 strategy areas. And I've organized the slides here in terms of, for each CAD strategy area, identifying those that were inward-facing versus those that were outward-facing that the group identified. So for the conditions that were identified as inward-facing, the strategy concepts that were within the strategy area of conditions. The inward-facing concepts that you all brainstormed at that last meeting included increasing validity of ODE's discipline data collection, identifying what data districts are currently collecting and using to evaluate student outcomes and program effectiveness, and also looking at the strategies that are being currently used by districts to address challenges. Outward-facing condition-related strategy concepts included increasing student access to universal design, as well as assistive technology. Generally, the buckets of chronic absenteeism and multi-tiered systems of support and that work, and personalized learning. In the strategy area of capacity, some of the inward-facing strategy concepts that you brainstormed included creating internal learning opportunities for staff here at ODE to establish and reinforce a shared understanding across the agency of some key concepts. And then we also talked about the importance of being able to leverage the new cross-office coherence team and that work that's starting up to help drive our work. Outward-facing strategy concepts that were in the area of capacities included strengthening district comprehensive improvement plans and supporting districts in doing an asset and initiative mapping to help them organize their work, similar to how some of the conversations we've been having internally about how do we get a real grasp on all the work that we're doing so we can be as efficient. We want to support districts in doing that same work. Some additional outward-facing capacities, providing districts with tools and guidance to improve their stakeholder engagement, professional learning opportunities, as well as continuing to develop research briefs that help to communicate and contextualize statewide trends and progress for districts to use in doing their local evaluations. In the area of laws, policies, and institutions, these were all essentially outward-facing concepts that were brainstormed. And again, these were just, raw ideas that people were throwing out. So we had references to House Bill 2016, which I believe that's the African American Student Plan. House Bill 3499, which is the English Learner Improvement Plan. Measure 98, which is looking at essentially ensuring students graduate college and career ready, dropout prevention, CTE, accelerated learning opportunities. Comprehensive district planning tools, leveraging the work that's begun in the district improvement partnerships and scaling that out. And then the statewide systemic improvement plans that are currently part of the work done by student services in the realm of special education. So again, this is all kind of that raw brainstorming, starting to get a little bit more specific around again, within our sphere of influence, what some of the ongoing work that's already happening that we want to leverage, and what some of the work that isn't currently happening but we know needs to if we're going to fully realize our vision through the lens of students transitioning successfully. Relationships, sorry, I forgot we had one more category. Inward-facing, there was a reference about coordinating with external leadership team and with ELD on attendance and exclusion data. And outward-facing, facilitating partnerships between high school teachers as well as elementary, middle school, and then on the other end with college instructors. Incentivizing collaboration and partnership, and then partnering with some of our partner agencies, namely Youth Authority, Youth Development Division, which is sort of an internal, sort of an external, and the Public Health Department.
Going to go back with that.
Sure.
External leadership team, can you talk a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, that is a good question, and this was one of those that I kind of took down a raw note that someone had written up. So is someone in the room, was this one of your comments that you're able to kind of explain who that was referring to? Okay.
Without being too presumptuous, I would think that they could be talking about the education system leaders like Lindsay, Kalam, David Mendel, Iris, that particular group.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
So anyway, before we move on to unveiling the draft strategies that we've distilled out of that brainstorm, does anyone have any questions, observations you'd like to share? Without further ado?
Okay. So what Holly and Terry and I did after Holly took some time and was distilling this was to develop 3 strategies that we thought came, that did come from the input that everyone had, but we thought it would be sort of more efficient to develop 3 and share them with you and see what you thought. Again, trying to remember what is truly our sphere of influence here at ODE, because our discussion last time did fluctuate between sort of small grain size and the larger, bigger picture. And Holly mentioned a little bit earlier with the glasses about, we are thinking about the student in the classroom, but our right now sphere of influence is not a particular student in a classroom. So the first strategy, they're not in any order, but the first strategy, good morning, that we drafted is create an internal ODE learning opportunities to establish and reinforce a shared understanding across ODE of education equity and culturally responsive pedagogy and practices. So this would fall under the capacity bucket about increasing knowledge and skill, so greater knowledge, greater skill there. So I'll just give you a minute to review that before I move on. So looking at ourselves internally and learning opportunities so that we have a better understanding, greater knowledge, greater skill in all of the work that we're doing around education equity and culturally responsive pedagogy and practices. So the next one. Leverage cross-office coherence team to develop systemic procedures to collaboratively identify, support, and monitor project and program implementation at the LEA level. This is also another capacity, falls in the capacity bucket. Looking at increasing knowledge, increasing skills. In both 1 and 2, there has been some work already started. Specifically in 1, there's been some work trying to share what's going on in districts, what are we doing, what are we asking districts to do. Related to number 2, cross-office coherence team has already begun some work. And then the third one falls under policies and institutions. So implement key projects and programs to support districts in ensuring every student transitions successfully. So if we remember the slide that was just up about some of the policies and institutions and the different bills, the different projects that are going on, that would fall under here. So what we want to spend a little bit of time with these 3 strategies, you have them written on the handout that you have on the slides, is to make sure, are these 3 things what we want to focus on? Are they within our sphere of influence where we can move the dial with ourselves? Yes, we are trying to get to the student, but within the work that we do. And do we have resources and sort of the resources and capacity to do these 3 things? So I think what would be helpful now, these are just the beginning, the foundation. And as we move forward in the years to come, in the next few years, it may be that something is added or we complete something and decide to select something else to move forward with. So if you could just take a minute and a few minutes actually and read through those, jot down a few notes, and are these the right strategies that you think we should focus on? It may be that we could have culled 2 more, but we also want to be strategic, I guess, or more focused on what we're doing so that we don't have 5, 6, 7 goals that we're trying to attempt, but being very selective about where we're beginning. So are these the right strategies? Are they in the right buckets? And the buckets are capacities, the laws and policies, relationships, and conditions. So we have 2 in capacities, not in capacities, 2 in the capacities bucket, and 1 in policies and institutions. Yes?
There are 3 concerns me, and it concerns me because it's super vague, as well as if we're thinking about it from the standpoint of laws and policies, how much control do we have over what projects and programs are developed, say from the legislature's view, I guess I'm just, yeah.
Good. No, I think this is the feedback that we want. And I'm answering sort of some of your questions to either help, but I think if it's vague, we need to take a look at it. Where this was coming from isn't where projects that are to come, but projects that are happening now. The Systemic Improvement Plan, the SSIP, House Bill 3499, House Bill 2016, they're already on.
Back to the things that you talked about before. I think we need to call that out then.
And part of this too was intentionally vague. I wanted the language to be clear enough that it would be coherent in kind of explaining the draft to you. But it is intentionally vague because one of the pieces that we really need your feedback today before we can move on is to really identify the focus. So in this general bucket, what are those programs or projects that we want to call out as the highest levers? And that's for this group to help define.
We can work with that to talk about alignment of implementation and maybe even differentiation based on district needs. So
I have a different concern than that about entry, but I don't know when you want. No, I'm just making sure if Terry's getting words like alignment and things down, just so that we can remember what some folks said. And I wanted to, if you don't mind, I wanted to ask you, Jonna, so given that, are there any that you would call out, given the conversation that we just had with you about what we were thinking about? And then Holly said, so do we want to be more specific and sort of call out? And you don't have to answer if you want to, I need to think about it. Okay. Nancy.
I have a disconnect between what is written in the sentence and the law and policies and institutions, because I think that implementing the key policies and programs, I understand it's the things that are current, but I think that there's other work that we can do more proactively around the laws and policies from the get-go.
Okay, and be specific, what do you mean?
I can be really specific because what jumped to mind was one of the House bills that's trying to go forward about changing the age of entrance to the school. And it is, we need to work on that and make sure that we're being proactive. I don't know how proactive we can be, but really clear about what happens to kids when they enter school at a later point.
Okay. We're talking about compulsory age.
Yes, they want to change it back.
To 7?
Yes. Because of kids with disabilities, and I could go on and on and on. Okay. When I look at this, implementing, we're missing a whole opportunity about laws, things that are moving forward.
So you were taking a step before that about the proactive, when we're in a legislative session and bills are going through, this is the work we're involved in right at this moment.
Also, we focus on policies. We could look at policies that we have in place, or we may need to have in place, or we may need to strengthen.
Yeah. The other piece, and I think you bring up a good point. So in terms of the timing and
no, you're fine.
No, real quick. I'm going to flip ahead to one of the last slides, and we'll come back. Oh, there we go.
I didn't have my head, so apologies.
I think it was like if you want to look, kind of refer to it in your handout, it's like the third to the last slide. But really quickly, just in terms of when this plan is going to affect, we're in the development phase now, which happens to align intentionally with legislative session. Our plan is that we're going to have a draft of the strategic plan with all the goals, strategies, tactics, metrics going forward in May, with the intention that as final decisions are coming down from the legislature, if there's new really large bodies of legislation, they again rise to the point that they are going to be levers that we're going to really be able to use to help drive students transitioning successfully. We'll have an opportunity over the summer to refine the scope to incorporate those. But given that whole process, we're not going to begin working the plan until September. It's going to kind of get finalized, cemented August after the legislative session wraps up, and we'll be working it essentially September 2017 through June 2019. So it'll be taking us through this biennium. So in terms of being proactive and informing as legislative concepts are coming up, that's work that for this strategic plan and what we're defining right now will be work that we'll be able to do to inform and influence the next legislative session. By the time we start working this plan, the session that's currently going on right now will have already wrapped up.
It'd be good if we're cognizant of those opportunities.
Yeah. So I think, and I think there's something that we can kind of build in, and as Sarah mentioned, the work is kind of where are we starting now that we can build on. Some of the tactics, that might be the case, but we've got tactics that we're moving on now, but calling out that when we get to the end of this biennium, which will include, kind of the ramp up in the next legislative session, that we, kind of know that we're probably going to need to identify some new specific tactics at that point in time that will enable us to have that proactive influence in shaping legislation that might feed into the next biennium. So I just wanted to share this timing as, kind of context as we're kind of talking about what's happening when in relation to legislative session, et cetera.
So back to 3, this is the one we were discussing first. Very good comments. Any others around this? Or you can pipe up with 1 and 2 and we can switch to the other ones as well.
What's the big strategy buckets or areas I'm wondering and wrestling with? First, how do we put ourselves as an agency and the actors in the agency as changing our own behaviors? I think whenever we're offering a strategic plan, we immediately want to say, these are all things we're going to do you, because that's how we approach programs and whatnot. But this is really about us. And it's going to be hard for us to kind of put that barrier up and say, we have to talk about our own conditions capacity relationships and the ways that we write policy or just allow practice to become policy or whatever else, may limit that. But then the second one is, how do we systematize that or put that into a place where it becomes systematic? And so when we look at the strategies, the 3 that we've listed, we don't have anything under relationships. And I know that this is all draft, but maybe front-loading too much. And then there seems to be some interrelationship and a theory of action emerging to say if we fix our own capacity and practices, then we can start to have aligned policy that will improve conditions and ultimately allow the relationships to keep that moving. And so I don't know how far we've gotten in the thinking there, but I don't want to try to separate them out and say we're going to do just conditions or just capacity.
Yeah, no, I think those are all valid points. And the reason I split back to the second draft strategy is that, at least kind of in my mind, going through all the feedback and the discussions that have happened really over our last 2 meetings, as well as some of the meetings of the cross-office coherence team, this is where, kind of my hopes and dreams are really living with that team being able to help sort out some of the pieces that you're talking about in terms of how we're approaching the development of policies in a way that's coherent, that makes sense and is really right for students, that we are creating that structure and that system internally that will then help to inform. So even though we'd be rolling out these strategies in tandem with one another, I don't necessarily see them as being impermeable, if that makes sense, so that the work that's happening under potentially, if we move forward with strategy 2 around the cross-office coherence work, that some of the work and the progress being done under that strategy will be able to inform and support the work that might be happening under the programs and projects that we call out under strategy 3 if we move forward with that strategy. So it's,
but I think the key thought that resonates with me with what Tim is saying is it's about our changing, about our behaviors and relationships changing here before we can ever get to the piece of we're going to be supporting districts to do what they need to do. So, and I think that's daunting, and I think it's a long process.
So just to kind of clarify what I think I'm hearing and then get feedback from the rest of the group, is there a potential proposal that at this point in time that we remove the outward-facing project program-focused strategy from the plan and instead really focus intensively on the inward-facing, building the structure, building the relationships piece, knowing that then down the road the intent is once we've established that foundation, then we adjust our focus to start looking more on those outward-facing?
But I don't see, so for me, when I look at number 1 and number 2, relationships are inevitable. Like, I don't I don't see how you can implement number 1 and number 2 without internal work. And, number 1, I feel like, our unit is going to be really integral in helping with number 1 and helping develop number 1 and seeing that come to fruition, and just the sheer way that we do internal work. I mean, Christy, you can speak to, what work that we're doing with your team. Like, it just doesn't, it causes you to do both, content knowledge, but also that stuff that Tim is bringing up about who you are in work. And so I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. You can't do 1 and 2 without that happening.
Right.
I'm sorry, Karen, I think that it would be short-sighted of us to leave out the number 3, because both of them happen in parallel, like both of them happen side by side. Like, there's no way possible that I can go to a team meeting, work on my ooey-gooey stuff, and then not have a relationship, and then work on the ooey-gooey with a district too. I'm sorry, that's my vocabulary today, ooey-gooey.
And obviously I need to say amen to all of that. But yes, I agree with that. But and just to add to that, to me, number 3 is really the only one that directly speaks to what our goal number 2 is.
Right.
Transition. So to me, number 1 and 2 are laying that foundation for us to be able to actually address what goal number 3 is, which is what we're supposed to be doing with goal 2 in general.
Can I ask, is it creating difficulty in having the buckets listed there? Because I think things aren't mutually exclusive. It's not that we just put the capacities area or the bucket under that. It's also relationships depending on sort of how you read it and do it. Is that making it confusing to people? Should we either put both of them or take both of them off? Meaning which strategy bucket they're coming from.
Well, I'm going to jump in because it is confusing for me that it looks like we're drafting in 3 areas, but actually no, 2 areas. Draft strategy 1 and draft strategy 2 are both listed as capacities, and draft strategy 3 listed as belong policies and institutions. And I keep going back to conditions and relationships. Why are we missing those? I mean, I'm not remembering exactly how we came to defining the 4 strategy areas as, big buckets of conditions, relationships, capacity, and water.
I could say a quick word to that. So the 4 strategy areas, the intent was not that we have to have a one-for-one distribution. It was more that whatever work we are calling out, in order to really rationalize, how they are an appropriate strategy at that right grade level within our sphere of influence, we needed to be able to say that they align to at least one of these areas. And they could, and in many cases do, actually impact multiple areas. What we call that here is just the one that seemed like, the primary, it fell mostly in here, even though there might be aspects of the others. But that's not to say that they don't also have crossover into the other areas.
So forgive us for geeking out fresh off of this improvement science conversation.
Bring it.
But we make these assumptions about, obviously our transition points are not where we want them to be, and that's what we're wrestling with. So if we play this out, we have some primary drivers that are creating that situation. What I hear folks saying is the primary drivers are our policies and practices, and sometimes the laws that get bestowed upon us, and that's creating some barriers around how we do that. So those are our primary drivers. Our secondary drivers are our own capacity and ability to establish relationships with one another so that we don't create that
Foundation. Yeah.
relationships and then kind of a condition. So we're starting to flesh this out in a way that says we first have to change our own policies and practices. To do that, we have to build our own internal relationships and capacity, including our learning. And so our change ideas start to become, how do we leverage cross-option opportunities? How do we, again, bring in more perspectives when we're writing OERs, when we are engaging with school districts, when we're trying to, figure out local context. And so that, I think, makes a ton of sense, and folks could really geek out about, like, okay, yeah, well, we can go do that.
Yeah. So, Tim, question for you. Are you seeing then, kind of that piece as do you think it's encompassed in, primarily draft strategies 1 and 2, or are you proposing that we need an additional strategy that is explicitly calling that out? Because I think, from Danisha's point is that, if I'm paraphrasing correctly, that, kind of the relationship piece that is work that is going to happen as we're doing strategies 1 and 2, or do you feel like it really does need to be its own standalone strategy in addition to?
I agree with Danisha. I think it's implied and essential to doing any of this moving forward. The tension we're running up against is that while we have some really strong energy around this coherence building, this cross-office work, we are receiving legislation that is causing us to be even more disconnected. And so we have to kind of link arms and say, hey, across the street, y'all need to stop because this doesn't make sense to us. That's a big long-term change idea, how we engage across the street, but we can, come together more efficiently in order to say, hey, what's going on here, what's going on there? I mean, we need to have a discrete call out to specific opportunities and adjustments for our kiddos and for our schools and for our district, but we also shouldn't put that in a little box and say this is the only thing that's going to touch students with disabilities, our African American Black students, our language learners, et cetera. Like we can't operate that way. It just doesn't make sense, and we're cannibalizing resources too.
So what would you propose? I definitely hear what you're saying. How would you propose if we were to develop a strategy that was focused at accomplishing or addressing that challenge, that problem? How?
If I'm looking at the flow chart from our vision to our strategy buckets to our tactics, I think our primary strategy area should be in kind of the capacity and policy area. Sorry, I'm trying to move out of other bodies of work that we're not all super versed in yet. We're still just kind of total new.
Should we go back to a different slide? Are you looking at the?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is it the structure of this that's Boston? Are you thinking of a different structure?
It's not all the way structured. I'm trying to link, what is the thing that we need to work on first and foremost. That's got to be our primary strategy. And so some of those things are going to be the way we go about doing that. We will have better policy practices, procedures, et cetera, if we have stronger learning to the capacity building, if we emphasize relationship building, if we really look at our own conditions for doing that. And I think we do have to take a long look at our climate culture here in the
And what I meant is, would it be helpful to look at how to do this in that way instead of the way it's organized?
for me, but I don't want to be I'm
just trying to interpret and try to think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I hear you.
That method would work for me too.
Yeah, you're talking about, I think me as well. I mean, we need to really zero in on our internal ODE culture overall and how what system or systems we can put into place to support a cohesive structure.
So kind of quickly, in that context, given that we have already kind of covered some of this ground, I want to be able to do kind of a gap analysis. So with that lens in mind, just kind of as a starting place as a yes/no, and it's not going to end as a yes/no, but just as a starting place, does this strategy support the work that we've called out as knowing we need to do to move forward? Do we want to keep this as one of our strategies and refine, the wording, the focus of it? But generally, does this help us move forward, or is this not where we are right now? Thumbs up. If you think this supports what we're doing, let's.
If we can take capacity, I guess it's the buckets that we're framing it under that are maybe tripping me up.
Okay.
If we can remove practices, then yeah, this is
Yep. And again, the wording here was just to get something, and then we're going to kind of refine the focus of, is it just education, equity, culturally responsive pedagogy practices? Are those the right things to be calling out? Are those the only things we need to be calling out right now? But just in terms of the general bucket, establish and reinforce the shared understanding across ODE about ... Okay. What about strategy number 2? Is this helping us move in the direction we need to move? Is this, work that we want to be doing right now?
So I would look at that as, that's the change. That's the change that we want to have happen in order to help us get to our aim. And those, so 1 and 2 then become, I'm just trying to figure this out.
John,
Yeah.
John, can I jump? I think
Please.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I see the same thing you're saying. I see this as a tactic under number 1. And as basically this is how we go about doing this shift internally. The internal phase as far as how are we developing the internal capacities, working collaboratively across the agency, and even with our sister agencies that are really, really close and embedded in our work, right? I mean, there's something, it's like, for example, that I know our team with ELD, there's some blends there, and it's kind of hard to see where we stop and they start kind of thing. But I see this more as almost a tactic, and maybe it's because it's pointing out a specific body of work across Office Polaris team that doesn't necessarily embody the entirety of the work of the agency, and that's why I'm struggling with this one as a draft strategy and see it as more of a tactic. Is that kind of getting, all right? Yeah. Okay. Oh, you stay right on the note.
Yep.
For me, the second one as well, I think it's along the same lines or not, but I want to, I guess, ensure that whatever we do outfacing informs then number 1 and the in-facing, inward-facing piece. Does that make sense? So there's an iterative process that's constantly going on between us and the districts and whoever we're working with, to where it informs our internal situation and our relationships, the conditions, our capacity. So it's not navel-gazing, in other words, number 1. It is about some looking at those structures. So I guess I see the same. I see 2 as a subset, but something that hopefully informs number 1 in that regard. So there's this dynamic that's going on all the time. And I think there's another piece to this too. Is there a framework or structure that is sort of stands outside of us that informs us in the way we ought to go in terms of looking at ourselves internally, et cetera? Does that make sense? So that we call out, I think, some of the unconscious and subconscious things that go on. I mean, in other words, if we start rearranging the chairs in our current mindset, paradigms that you use, I don't see how things really change. So somebody has to call us out of that. And to me, it has to be sort of something to some degree objective or standing outside of it. I liken it to some of the equity work about in diversity and working through some of those pieces where it calls you to some accountability and to thinking about your thinking, if you will, and others bringing to mind or calling out some of those. So in other words, creating structures and communication and but strategies internally that would have us, I guess, move in a more thoughtful fashion, but in a way that really challenges all of us. You know, we're building, I just am a little concerned that we're creating the structure and creating the framework and creating all this. I'm not quite sure how that calls us out in terms of change. How will things, I mean, the structure may be a bit different, but at the end of the day, did it change anybody's hearts or minds? Like I think Tim was alluding to earlier. At the end of the day, we have to change our minds and hearts about what we're doing and how we're operating internally, and then moving out to the world and to the districts that we work with, the kids we work with.
Well, you can go back to the first so long.
So as you were being, as I'm hearing you talking, it sounds like this work, looking at broadening the focus to not just the shared understanding of some key concepts, but also layering in pieces around collaboration and the structure, and then what's currently under draft 2, which is the cross-office coherence teamwork, that body of work serves as kind of a set of tactics that will help to reach or to implement the strategy.
That's what I
And then I think if number 2 becomes a tactic, number 3 is half strategy, half tactic, in the sense that we want to be talking about this, but before we can have a mind shift and a heart shift, we have to have an expectation shift.
So it sounds like we maybe need a new strategy focused on that.
I think it comes as part of the learning opportunities and the, what we do, but we're emphasizing that we've got a lot of learning to do here. I mean, that's going to be our primary driver for ensuring that ultimately school districts have systems in place to support healthy, successful transition. So again, we're not going to go and transition those students. I feel like this is I've said it 100 times. We have to safeguard how we expect school districts to transition their students. And we are setting up the right policies and the right support and systems to look at that in order to see that happen.
So what?
Back on number 1, it reminded me of goal 3 that we were at yesterday. And, I believe that education, equity, culture, responsive pedagogy and practices need to be a part of this. But they had some language around belief gap and growth mindset. It was overarching in a way that led to education equity that I think might get at some of this that we're talking about, the shift.
I worry about not calling it out.
Oh, and I think we can wordsmith plenty, but that language created that opportunity for some of the cultural.
And I think, too, real quick, just kind of pausing so you know where we're going, hopefully get going today while we have you all here in this room, is starting to, once we've kind of nailed down, and we're not going to do the wordsmithing, but just nailing down the focus, nailing down what are our strategies, what are their areas of focus, starting to start defining and brainstorming the tactics that are going to actually define the work. So real quick, just so you kind of have a sense of, grain size that strategies are aiming at versus what the tactics are going to aim at. I'm going to skip ahead real quick. So tactics are really defining how do we contribute to the changes that we want to see, what specifically, what are the actions that need to happen for success for this goal, for the strategy. So tactics, again, they are the key actions leading to whatever the outcome is that we need. And as we talked about earlier, in this case, outcomes are the strategies. So what I was going to share, these are my notes, not on the slide, so I'm just going to kind of talk to you. In terms of what we're aiming at grain size for the tactics, they're essentially work plans. They're work that we want to be specific enough that as a team, as an agency, we know the specific work that needs to happen if we're going to be able to deliver on our strategies, deliver on our goal. That said, we also don't want it to get so down to that micro milliliter level that we get lost in the forest for the trees. So it's kind of hitting that grade says that we do need it to be kind of specific. These are kind of that work plan level. We're not going to be micromanaging them as a goal team, but they will be there as a reference for us to go back to when we're evaluating progress. If we're encountering challenges, we can go back and say, did we do this work? And if yes, but we're not seeing progress, was this really the right work that we've called out? What are the tweaks that need to be made? Where are the obstacles? So it does need to be specific enough that it's really giving that shape The strategies are, again, kind of more of that, kind of 10,000 foot level that's really calling out, here's at a large level the work that needs to happen. The tactics are getting down to that finer grain size that's really kind of getting down to, think project implementation plan level. So for instance, under that strategy 3 that we were talking about earlier, the original, thinking was that if we identified particular projects or programs that we wanted to call out under there, that the tactics would essentially be mapping onto what are the project implementation plans saying. That's really mapped out the work. So kind of think that level when we're talking tactics. Strategy is kind of that higher level of defining, what's the change that we need to see happening. The tactics are what's the action that needs to be taken so that that change occurs. Is that helpful?
Okay.
So I'm going, with that frame in mind, we're going to go back to the draft strategy so that we can, and were we on, which one were we looking at number 3?
Tim has been talking about that.
Yeah. So right now it sounds like we've kind of come to consensus around strategy 1, broadening the focus to include structure around collaboration. And I think that's where kind of the tactics can help to define the specific areas that we want to call out in terms of what is it that we need to have shared understanding around. Is it cultural responsive pedagogy? Is it equitable practices? Is it growth mindset, belief gap? That's where we can kind of define specifically what is the work that needs to happen, what are the trainings that need to happen, that level of work. So if we kind of look at that as one strategy and kind of some ideas for what might get encompassed in the tactics there, what do we think about this draft strategy? Does this live on in some way, shape, or form, or is this not where we are right now? And it's okay to say if this is not where we are right now.
I just feel like we have a hard time getting to that until we do the other things. So I tend to feel like we go slow to go fast. I mean, but that's my own idea.
I mean, this is saying what is the purpose for the other 2. So I don't want to lose it. Because this is really why we're doing 1 and 2 is so that we can do this.
Yeah, and as Sarah mentioned, the strategic plan, it is going to be iterative. So what we mean by that is we're building a plan that's really shaping what is the work that needs to happen in the next 2 years, essentially. But with the very intended outcome that when we get a year and a half from now and we start planning for the next biennium, if we're doing it right, then the work we're doing now is serving a foundation that will then be able to pivot and reach further. And then that will establish a new foundation. From there, we'll be able to reach further. So we don't want to stay here in perpetuity. The intent is that, whatever work we're doing in the next biennium is laying that groundwork so that we can achieve greater and greater aims. So even if something doesn't make it in now, if we decide that where we are right now really is focused internally on what needs to happen within ODE, then yes, I think we can definitely capture that it's with the intent that that's laying the groundwork that in our next strategic plan, we're going to be in a position that we'll really be able to move the dial working, kind of through these outward-facing strategies. So I think we can do it both ways if the group does feel like we're really needing to focus internally.
I think just to let you, I know we're not wordsmithing, but I think what helps make this work for me programs to prioritizing and identifying and prioritizing key projects and programs. So that, I mean, that shift of focus, right?
Yeah, with aligning, yeah.
It's about alignment, right?
You're in my head.
I love it. I'm so
I know it sounds scary to me, but I do love it.
But I really think that goes hand in hand with the first priority in terms of how we're building collaboration across the office and working on alignment internally so that when we are working with the project, we can see why they're important and why they're key and why they're priority. But we have to engage in those conversations. And granted, for those that were a part of Goal 3 yesterday, I think this is, I have to admit that some of my thinking is coming from that experience of looking at a wall of all the programs and saying, wow, I don't know what that is, right? And how do we really honestly engage in a meaningful collaboration when there's so much going on that there's so much happening. How do we prioritize? And I do believe that this is extraordinarily powerful if we engage in this meaningfully and transparently for our districts, because they're struggling with the same thing.
Yep.
And we talk about modeling for our districts. If we can set priorities, then we can help them set theirs, right? And allow them to maybe identify priorities that are different.
So I'm seeing a lot of head nods. I think are we ready to take a thumb vote? If we make the change from implement to instead something along the lines of identifying, prioritizing, and aligning key projects and programs, does this feel like the right, that we want to keep this as a strategy area or focus, strategy? Okay. So we're at 2 right now. Are we good there? Okay. Okay.
Because we could all agree that if we're going to do 2 things over the next 2 years, and these are the 2 things that we're going to be, holy crap, what do we change things?
So I know that I heard people referencing relationships a lot in the conversation. Do you all feel confident that we'll be able to capture the relationship piece when we start fleshing up the tactics in these 2 areas? Okay. So I think with that,
The relationships and the conditions.
Yep. So I think with that, you all get a moment to just kind of digest, reflect. While we're going to get these posters ready, what we're going to be doing is breaking up into breakout teams. And again, these are very permeable. This is not like a set in stone that these are the teams we're working in and how we're organizing the work moving forward. It's for today to start doing some brainstorming, divide and conquer. We're going to have a group that's brainstorming to come up with tactics around the strategy, the first strategy, and one on the second strategy. So do some thinking about which one you feel like you're most in the headspace to contribute to today. And then we'll have a chance to do a share out as well to kind of get the full group feedback, and this will continue through email and into our next meeting we'll be able to finalize. So whichever group you decide to participate in this morning, you will also get to provide input and feedback on the other strategy.
And if everybody goes to one, we're going to have to encourage someone to go to the other one. So it doesn't have to be, right? I'm sure it will split up and it's great.
So while you're kind of thinking which group, I'm going to do my attempt as I'm kind of writing on your strategy labels to try to capture the new scope too. And again, we're not doing the wordsmithing today, so I just bear with me if I get the wording not quite. But in general, if you're ready to stand up and stretch your legs, we'll have goal 1 over here and goal 2 over on that wall.
Goal 2, goal 3.
Yes. Goal strategy 2 is now. Goal 3 I'm sorry.
One, two. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Actually, I was about to,
Am I getting this?